2, 1, 2. Is this thing working? It appears so. Well then. This is employee 73, 6F, 63, 72, 61, 74, 65, 73. Designation auditor. Recording from Workstation 6C, 69, 6D, 62, 6F. The date is October 19th, 1079 AB. As you know, I have been assigned the illustrious task of creating an accounting for the ill-fated expedition of the SD Catabasis and its 8 crewmen. Specifically, my objective, handed to me by my gracious superiors, is as follows. Using information collected from the crash site and its recovered black box, I must construct a full narrative of exactly how the company lost one of its scientific cruisers. I will give a full audit of lost company assets, salvage any data, and determine the cause of the ship's demise. I have been given full authorization, 2 assistants, and a, spacious office in the bathypelagic wing of the 14th tower in order to achieve my goal. For posterity's sake, I will be redacting certain information that could harm the company and its interests. When plays, it means that I have intentionally obfuscated the information being presented. A completely unredacted report will be submitted to those with HADL level clearance. To begin, I believe I should lay out an initial summary of what we know. The SD Catabasis was an Anemoi-class vessel, created on February 11th, 1065 AB, by the joint efforts of one of the last ever produced. It was designed as a scientific survey and light cargo transport craft, optimized with long-term self-sustaining measures to allow for, longer missions in deep space. It was officially christened the Catabasis in 1066 AB after its first successful survey of an ironic name, considering its eventual fate. The intervening missions run by this vessel would be, by and large, uneventful. From a preliminary glance at our records, the only thing I found interesting was how often the ship needed repairs. Across 5 different surveys, the ship's comms array was consistently broken. Its oxygenator had to be replaced 3 times, and its temperature controls required constant maintenance. It was by all means an unreliable ship, which is not unsurprising. After all, the Anemoi line had been in the process of being discontinued when it was made, officially being replaced as the light cargo and survey ship format by the austere pattern in 1067 AB. Regardless of technical difficulties, the Catabasis ran its missions successfully and was a functional, albeit temperamental, company asset at the time of launch. In 1077, the Catabasis would be requisitioned for a deep space survey around the Jovian moons. This mission, which is the reason for my present recordings, would be the end of the Catabasis. The Catabasis would be crewed by 8 employees, hand-selected by the board to carry out the survey. This is the first highly unusual aspect of this mission. Normally, the board is only nominally involved in the selection of crew members for manned expeditions. Rather, an operations coordinator or project manager would have the task delegated to them from on high, which would then be further passed down the chain of command until some manager's poor intern is reading reports and making recommendations. I do have a possible explanation for this break in protocol. Our competitors have been aggressively pushing into the Jovian space, establishing a forward communication satellite that orbits. From what I can gather, the board wanted to send a message of our dominance in the Jovian market, hence the hand selection of each employee. However, this is only a working theory, and could be subject to change as I gather more information on this case. Regardless of motive, 7 crewmen and 1 captain were hand-selected for the 7th and final survey of the SD Catabasis. The members of the ship were as follows. The captain, ID 42, 72, 75, 74, 75, 73. LC. The head engineer, ID 49, 63, 61, 72, 75, 73. Percival. The navigator, ID 48, 45, 41, 56, 45, 4E, 53, 45, 4E, 54. Abraxas. The gunner, ID 6C, 61, 64, 6F, 6E, Follock. The surgeon, ID 5365 6B 68 6D 6574, Siobhan Trota. Technical expert, ID 74 75 72 69 6E 67, Catherine Nataraja. Chief psychiatrist and mood specialist, ID 4A 61 6E 75 73, Gabriella Alcepius. And the primary surveyor, ID 41 44 41 4D, Abraham Linnaeus. I would love to go into further detail about each of these crew members, their backgrounds, the criteria for them being chosen for this mission. However, I cannot do that presently. Frustratingly, most of their background reports were corrupted in a catastrophic blackout that hit our records facility, and have yet to be restored. Normally, this wouldn't be an issue, as all crews are ordered to keep backups of all mission logs and files pertaining to said missions on their ship's designated workstations. However, due to the catastrophic nature of the crash and the faulty construction of the ship and unauthorized tampering, most records were corrupted beyond salvaging. Even the mission statement for the catabasis, the very reason why these people were sent out in space, did not survive the blackout. I digress. I've been able to piece together some information from what files survived, and will attempt to give as coherent a background as I possibly can. It seems fitting to start this discussion with the captain, as we were able to recover significant documentation that will be able to redress some of the false narrativization around her. Immediately after the crash, there was speculation spread by some disgruntled employees that Elsie was only ever selected for the mission because of her father's close relations with the board of directors. Some went as far to insinuate that Elsie deliberately crashed the ship in some conspiracy to advance her career. These rumors are largely founded on the fact that she did in fact survive the expedition and faced major career advancement afterwards due to her heroic attempt to save the ship. However, I do not believe that there is enough evidence to substantiate these claims. Elsie was inexperienced, yes, but she was more than qualified for the position, and the insinuation that she would deliberately crash the ship is patently absurd. Using her resume and previous flight logs, which managed to survive the site-wide blackout, we can ascertain that Elsie was a relatively inexperienced, yet gifted pilot. She graduated top of her class in the Athenaeum in 1071 AB, and was accepted to the cosmonaut program. She would successfully complete her training in 1073 AB and co-pilot 2 long-haul missions before being assigned to the catabasis. The pilot she worked under, employee 47, 61, 67, 61, 72, 69, 6E, one Anatoly Petrikov, commended her work, labeling her as one of the most technically able and reliable pilots he had ever seen. This would be her first mission as a full captain, and I am certain she did not take that responsibility lightly. Though managing an entire ship, especially one as ornery as the catabasis, would cause even the most well-intentioned of captains to be remiss in their duties. It's a fair assumption, then, that Elsie, as inexperienced as she was, would fail to manage every aspect of the ship, especially concerning the activities of her brother, the chief engineer, though I am getting ahead of myself. Perhaps not getting too ahead of myself. After all, Percival is our next topic of discussion. Elsie's brother, one Percival, was serving as the chief engineer aboard the catabasis, and he is surprisingly well documented. Miraculously, his transcript, resume, project drafts, augmentation history, genetic profile, complaints, and yes, incident report survived the blackout. What we know about Percival is this. Despite showing early promise in a technical feeder school, he did exceedingly poorly on his company entrance and placement exams. Despite this low scoring, he still was able to secure an apprenticeship under the previous chief engineer. An incredibly prestigious position, more than likely due to his father's own position within the company. His augmentation shows that Percival was fitted with a Mark III Cogito enhancement on February 2nd, 1067, and a Fabrique matrix on January 1st, 1069. These enhancements are incredibly expensive, but allow individuals to augment their prior intellectual prowess to exceed their peers in regards to intellectual and engineering endeavors. With these enhancements, Percival would make himself somewhat useful to the company. He would assist in the creation of the category, and even help finalize the design for the Oster format, even if his contributions to these projects were as paltry as signing his name on the blueprints. Percival would graduate from his apprenticeship in 1071 and take on a full-time engineering position within the company. He would work in the Hephaestus Lounge with a specialization in the creation of spacecraft. He would submit 3 designs for a light cruiser craft he had deemed the Erebus. These designs confounded other engineers. They were full of seemingly random design choices and strange technical specifications that would be next to impossible to implement. When asked about his work by his colleagues, Percival would be evasive, refusing to explain the purposes of his designs. According to a written complaint filed on June 5, 1074 AB, by employee 46-6F72-64, one Nathaniel Smith, Percival was exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. He would consistently miss meetings, and when he would join his colleagues, he was mostly unresponsive. It would get worse in the following months, with Percival often not leaving his office. When he was rarely spotted, quote, he looked like he was in another world, his eyes glazed over and his lips slowly moving, reciting words no one could hear, end quote. Eventually, Smith would attempt to confront Percival, entering into his office on September 9th. There he found Percival, frantically typing away on his workstation, scrawlings of strange proofs plastered across the walls. When he attempted to get Percival's attention, the boy wouldn't speak to him. His eyes were glued to his monitor, which, if Smith is to be believed, was completely turned off. Percival would be reprimanded after this complaint. However, this did little to curb his erratic behavior, which would culminate on October 7th, 1074 AB, with an incident that resulted in the severe maiming of 5 of Percival's fellow co-workers, including Smith. The incident would be reported at 0530 hours, when an internal alarm was broadcast, summoning the asset recovery team to the Hephaestus Lounge. There they would find Percival, surrounded by the bodies of his co-workers, an unplugged workstation at his feet, and the words, "Do not forget," painted in blood all over his body. Percival was incapacitated and taken into custody, while his fellows were taken to a critical care facility. During treatment, it was found that their eyes were removed and their data shards were resulting in permanent blindness and paralysis. Percival would be officially suspended from the company on October 10th, 1074 AB. This incident was determined to be a severe psychological break due to Percival's history of increasingly erratic and self-destructive behavior. Normally, an incident of this scale would be grounds for termination or even liquidation, especially considering Percival's lackluster output. However, due to his father's intervention, Percival was allowed to keep his job if he went on a psychiatric leave of absence, hence the suspension. The incident would be largely buried, with the report being restricted to those with HODL-level clearance, or other members of the board. Only recently was its clearance level lowered to bathysphere permissions. Percival's absence would last until 1078 AB, where he would be hand-selected by the board for the Catabasis mission. One can only assume that his father had something to do with this hiring. Perhaps the rumors of an incompetent nepotism hire were largely correct. They just had the wrong person. Documentation for the other crew members is sparse. I have a few ancillary reports mentioning the gunners, Follett's previous military service. It seems he served with the Asset Recovery Squad in the reclamation of Saturn and would earn himself a distinguished service commendation in the Burning Ring Offensive for scuttling a Class 2 Maelstrom pattern cruiser, it seems. Falk is an odd pick for a vessel such as the Catabasis. A military veteran aboard a light science cruiser. The fact that a gunner was even called for is odd. The Catabasis, which like most Nimoy-class ships, is demilitarized. Perhaps Falk served as a pseudo-quartermaster or enforcer for the inexperienced captain, keeping others in line. Given his prior military service, I would hazard to guess he had the acumen and the augmentation possible to do that job. I was also able to recover a disciplinary report concerning the surgeon, Siobhan Troda, who, according to it, attempted to form a union in 1069 AB, though nothing came of it. As far as I can tell, her unionizing activities ended prior to her being stationed on the Catabasis, and she acquitted herself with the dignity expected of her position. As for the rest of the crew, I have next to nothing. Abraham Linnaeus' name appears across multiple citation and accounts of the Saturn conflict, as well as roundups on Archaeotech, but I cannot locate any of his written work within our database. Abraxas may as well not exist, as all I can find in him is ancient history surrounding the Christian cult that was worshipped by old Earth. But at the very least, I can verify that he did indeed exist, due to a manifest pulled from the Hermes 12. This colony ship housed Abraxas and escorted him to our office on Ceres. The worst offenders, by far, are Catherine and Gabriella. I can find no evidence of their existence, aside from the manifest on the Catabasis, leaving them as complete unknowns. What is known is that every crew member would board the Catabasis on the 15th of March, 1078 AB, and begin their mission, flying from an advanced base on Ceres to... The ship would stay in regular contact with the company in the coming months, submitting regular reports of their status until June 15th, where the ship went dark. There are no records of what happened on the ship from June 15th to its final day of December 25th, 1078 AB. What we do know is that an escape pod containing 3 of the crew, Elsie, Catherine, and Gabriella, would be launched on December 25th, 0330 hours, and begin floating through space. It wouldn't be until January 21st, 1079 AB, that the escape pod would be detected by another vessel, the SD Rachel, and its inhabitants would be rescued. The Catabasis itself would not be recovered till September 15th, as it crashed on our competitor's property, which necessitated a long-winded negotiation and settlement. After recovery, the survivors would of course be interviewed, and would give the company a consistent narrative of what happened aboard the Catabasis when it went radio silent. According to the remaining crewmen, the journey started off fine. They were en route going to accomplish their mission. Auditors note, to my immense frustration, in every interview conducted, they never state their original mission objective. I will be discussing this failure in procedure with the interviewer at a later date. The problems began when the ship's comms array was damaged beyond repair on June 15th, leaving the ship in a state of complete isolation, all contact to and from the company becoming strictly impossible. This isolation caused psychological deterioration for all members of the crew. The ship's resident psychiatrist, Gabriella Alshepius, would attempt to keep the moods of the crew stabilized after the event. But despite her best efforts, the crew would slowly become bitter, turning on one another. The hostile environment created by said deterioration would weigh especially heavy upon the chief engineer, who, again, despite Gabriella's best attempts, would begin to spiral. In the following months, Percival would become more reclusive, burying himself in his work, spending more time in the innards of the ship. When he would be spotted, he wouldn't be far away from the comms array terminal, Workstation 4E4958. According to every survivor's testimonial, Percival claimed he was receiving messages from the outside the ship. These phantom messages could never be corroborated, and according to Elsie, Catherine ran a deep file search on the workstation on November 15th, though Catherine places it on the 21st. Regardless of when it happened, this scan revealed nothing, and cemented that Percival was delusional, and possibly a danger to others. This resulted in Gabriella recommending him to be temporarily imprisoned in the ship's infirmary. Percival would undergo strict psychiatric treatment from November 15th or the 21st until the 18th of December, in which he seemed to be making steady progress. He would be released on the 18th of December and pretend to be well. He would converse with the crew calmly and settle back into his work with an uncharacteristically jovial mood. According to the survivors, there was a real air of normalcy aboard the ship. Percival seemed to have made real progress, and whatever demons of the mind he had been fighting, well, they seemed to have largely been caged. Sadly, his progress would prove to be a ruse. On December 24th, at around 23:30, Percival would leave his room and disable the panopticon security system. He would then sneak his way to the navigation deck and murder Follick, who was guarding the door to the main console. He would then make his way into the navigation deck and kill Abraxas, who was utilizing the console while Elsie slept for the night. There, he would sabotage the ship and change its course, aiming it straight at He would unintentionally trip an inbuilt trigger that partially reactivated the panopticon system, causing a ship-wide alarm to sound. This roused the remaining crew and captain at around 0:20 hours. Elsie, after advising Gabriella and Catherine to prepare an escape pod, went with Siobhan to see if anyone was injured. Along the way, they discovered the corpse of Abraham, alone in his bed. His eyes were and the word labyrinth in his chest. They would make their way to the navigation deck, finding the corpses of Follick and Abraxas. Percival was still standing at the console. Elsie attempted to reason with him, to get him to back away from the machine, but Percival was unresponsive. Suddenly, he would grab Follick's SD Anku submachine gun and empty it into the center console, rendering it inoperable. He would then turn the gun onto Elsie and Siobhan, killing Siobhan in a hail of gunfire before being shot by Elsie, using her personal protection weapon. The surviving members would board an escape pod at around 01:30, and it would launch at 01:33. Of course, there are minor differences between each telling. Catherine's account disputes the date of the scan on the workstation, placing it on the 21st of November, and claims that the actual crash of the ship took place on the 26th of December. Gabriella argued that Elsie's account, which is largely what I base the summary on, neglects to mention how responsible she was for locking up Percival. However, despite these small differences, the general gist of this tragedy remains the same. Percival, the head engineer, after months of deterioration, snapped and was responsible for the murder of 4 employees and the destruction of the catabasis. These are the facts as we know them. However, with the reacquisition of the catabasis, we have been afforded new opportunities for further understanding. Specifically, the ship's surviving black box, a database containing all of the ship's files, including those saved on personal workstations. The box itself is a jumbled mess of files. The standard storage procedures seem to have been altered by the crash, causing the cache of files to be presented in no discernible order. Regardless of its orderliness, the box will allow us to re-examine this case and truly understand what caused this crash. I will now begin a thorough examination of the newly uncovered black box, detailing every file that we uncover. Is this really necessary? We already know what happened from the survivors, and even a cursory glance at the black box's files corroborates their story. For one, take their mention of the disabling of the panopticon system. There is an error report in the black box, in the panopticon system directory, titled Unexpected Error System Shutdown on the 24th of December at 23:35, exactly when the survivors said the panopticon system was shut down. From what I can tell, nothing in here is going to change the facts. A troubled young man, coddled his whole life by nepotism, was given a job by his father that he couldn't handle. Left in deep space with the stress of taking care of a craft like the Catabasis and mounting isolation, he began to crack at the seams. Couple that with his pre-existing mental instability and violent incidents, and we have a pretty open and shut case that Percival is our culprit. Not to mention the new physical evidence. Though no bodies were recovered from the crash site, a severed hand, which was determined to be Percival's, was found on the remains of the navigation deck console, which overturned the ship's flight path and sent it careening into that moon. This whole case should have been dropped as soon as the ship was recovered. Hell, it should have been dropped after the victims' testimonies were taken. At the very least, it should not have been assigned to me. I was managing an entire wing of the tower, for God's sakes, and they bumped me down to this cramped office. I used to have a windowed view. I'm getting off topic. I'll more than likely scrub this from the official report. Can't appear unprofessional. It's just frustrating. Fine. If they want me to run through hoops to get back in their good graces, I will. I'll do the best damn audit this company has ever seen, even if it is a complete waste of my time. I'll attempt to run an auto-sorting algorithm overnight to see if I can straighten out this black box. I'll be back in my office early tomorrow, and will begin my examination in earnest. End log.